Hello everyone, welcome to Painting Crafty. If you're new here, my name's Melanie and I'm glad you're joining me today. And my returning creative friends, I so appreciate you being here. Today I'm a part of a YouTube collaboration. We have two hosts. We have Shelly with Repurposed My Way and Dawn with Shabby Meets Bling. You're going to be able to find the links to their channels inside of my description, as well as the playlist for all of the rest of the creatives who will be joining in today's rustic event. Well, let's go ahead and see what I'm doing today. Well, I'm going to be creating this little sweet angel, and I didn't turn on my camera right away when I started recording. So I just wanted to quickly tell you some of the things that I started with for the base of my project. This happens to be a little charcuterie board that I purchased at Walmart. It is a great little surface to start with. And the first process I did for this was copied off my papers in neutral tones, either like sepia tone, a brown tone, or a black and white image. And that's where I started the project, and I glued them all on with my favorite glue, the Liquitex Matte Medium. This seals things really well. It dries, not sticky. I can put on water-based products that might smear around, put a layer of this on, coat it, and then be able to recoat again. It's my favorite go-to glue when I do mixed media. Well, let's pop over and see what I'm doing, and we'll start the recording there. I'm going to kind of take you on a little bit of a roller coaster ride. Mixed media definitely starts where there might be some ugly stages and you might wonder, what on earth is she doing? Well, let me know in the end if you think it turned out fine, if you think maybe I went too far, because I do like all the things. And sometimes I'm a more is better kind of girl. So let me know what you think. Well, let's go ahead and start this and see how the journey starts with making her. At this step in the process, my paper is nice and dry, so I'm going to be using 100 grit sandpaper to use it to able to get off all of the little extra bits of the dried paper off the edges. Sandpaper works perfect for this step. Once I have that done, I'm going to create a pattern for my angel. I'm using an egg shape for her head, put in the neck, and then I'm going to be just drawing her body in like a triangle shape, smaller at the top, a little wider at the bottom. When I create her arms, I'm just doing a very primitive style. If you think like a heart, it's going to be a heart shape. Her arms are going to come up and around because this little angel is going to be holding a chicken. I know, a chicken. But she's going to be darling when she's holding it. Once I decided on what my shape is, I'm going to go ahead and block in the back of my shape with gesso. Gesso's just like a priming paint is what it is, but I'm going to use that because it's slightly translucent. I'm still going to be able to see my papers behind there, and I'm going to be able to use that to block in my shape. And there's that cute chicken I was talking about. I'm going to be using my Cutter Bee scissors to go ahead and do the fussy cutting around there. It's my favorite scissors to use for fussy cutting, and I've had them for quite a while, and they stay really sharp. Up next, I started the flesh tone of my little gal. I just chose a little bit of a medium color of flesh tone. I knew this was going to be just the beginning base color. I'm going to be adding a lot more tones and shades and highlights on her before I finished. So I'm going to apply that color to her head, her neck, and her arms. Once I finished that and gave it some time to dry, I went ahead and applied the Bahama Blue color by Deco Art. I thought that color would go well with the colors down below that I chose. Some of my papers have a patina green bluish color on there, and I knew I would be aging this gal too because it is the rustic event after all. So I'm going to be putting this bright blue underneath so that when I lay my rustic colors over the top, I'm going to see a difference. So I'm just using inexpensive brushes. They're kind of my favorite when doing acrylic layering paint like this. When using the inexpensive brushes, I never feel guilty about scratching around and scrubbing. I knew I wanted to make my gal have red hair, so I started out with a darker brown color so I could lay that bright red on top. One of my favorite bright reds to use to create red hair is called Pyro Red by Golden, one of my favorites. Now you can see here I'm adding those next layers of color onto my skin tone. I'm choosing kind of it was a burnt sienna color that I was using to add some shadows on there. I'll be layering some of that color on and then going back and retouching it again. It's definitely a dance process of adding light, adding dark, and going back and forth. but it's well worth it. All the layers make a difference. And that's the great thing about acrylic paint. You can always change it if you don't like it. I do a lot of watercolors, and that's a whole different ball game. You can't have as much flexibility, but with acrylic paint, you do have the flexibility. So I suggest playing around, seeing what you get, and don't worry about making mistakes. So down under here, I decided I wanted to add a little bit of shadowing to my skirt and deepen some of the colors. So I took that same color that I added on the top, the burnt sienna, and I created a little bit of a washed border around there, and I added that on with an angle brush. That was probably the best brush I used when I did my painting, was this little bit of an angle brush. I like how the angle brush can float that color across. If you have just a little bit more paint on the tip and less on the as it goes across, you're going to get a nice float line. And that's what I did on the very top as well. I wanted to shadow that top. You can see how it gives it a lot more depth. Just by adding a little bit more shadow there, it does not look so flat. So I put in a few layers of that and really creating a nice look. Up next is going to be that pyrrole red that I was talking about. See how much brighter that is? But it looks great with that brown underneath there. So by having that layer on there of the brown and then adding that next layer of the red, it just really adds a great look to that red hair. I had red hair, or I do have red hair. Although as I'm getting older, I'm getting more of that silver tinge in my hair. Here comes that cute chicken. I'm going to glue her on with the matte medium. I want to be generous with my glue to make sure the paper is going to be held down. I'm going to put that on and then kind of just brush it around with a brush. Don't use your good brushes with this glue because it'll dry really hard. So use your inexpensive brush or your cheap brush that you don't mind putting glue through there. But this glue works great. I'm going to put it on the top as well and make sure my chicken is really glued down well. Once I've got all my glue on, I'm going to go ahead and take my finger and just kind of smooth it down to make sure there's no wrinkles and bumps underneath there. I wanted her kind of flat at the end, so I just used my finger to smoosh around that glue a little bit. Now I'm back to adding more highlights and lowlights onto my skin. You can see how I'm kind of adding a little bit brighter line on the front of her arms just to give it a little bit of brightness. You're going to do that dance again of dark and light, dark and light. But again, it's just acrylic paint, so you're going to be able to do that, and you have a lot of flexibility to be able to change your colors if you like. This is just a close-up of what it looks like. See all that great texture in there and those colors? She's really coming to life. I love all the variety inside of her. Now I've decided that I wanted to take a little bit of that Bahama blue and be able to add some of that onto her skirt. So I'm taking that brush, just a scruffy old brush, again, not an expensive one, because you can see how I'm just kind of rubbing and pushing that paint around. I'm using it kind of dry. I want some on my brush, but not a lot. I want to be able to still see those images down below, but I want to kind of just blush that color across her dress. I like that look of combining the top with the bottom. Now I'm going to be able to take my pencil and I'm going to start working on her facial features. Now I'm not doing precise facial features on this. I'm going more for a primitive look. So I started with my pencil, drew in general lines, and now I'm going to come in with my brush and lay in the dark areas for her eyes. And I'm going to be dancing back and forth with my pencil and my paint. So you can see how I just tap in a little bit of brown. I'm not going for a lot of details. This is a pretty small drawing. And I'm going to be tapping in that brown, and then I'm going to be picking up some other colors and laying in the shadows. So I'm starting with her eyes, and then I'll be moving around her face. I'm using a pretty small brush for this. I'm using a number 0. That face is pretty small, so I'm just using just a small, inexpensive, it's an Art Smith brush. It's a brand from Joann's. Again, I'm not using expensive brushes. You can see I picked up my pencil again, kind of redefining my shapes. I just like using a pencil because it's smaller, and I can get in there, and I leave a lot of my pencil marks right on my paintings. I don't really erase them. I like that look of seeing some of the work as I go. Here I am bringing in another pencil. This one's called a Kimberly 9XXB. It's very soft. It really does border on being a charcoal pencil. It adds some nice rich darkness to my painting. So I like using this to create line work. Now I added a little bit of red to her lips. Of course, it's pretty dark. I'm going to be putting in a little bit of white just to add a little bit of brightness. I'm not going to try to get too many details in her face when it comes to lips and eyelashes and super big eyebrows or anything like that. I'm going for a very rustic, primitive look. Here I am, I'm laying in a shadow on one side of her face. I'm going on the side where her nose shape was, where I actually painted in and drew. I'm going to add a darker shadow on that side of the nose. Going to add just a little bit of shadow underneath her nose and on her forehead to give it a little bit more depth. You can also add a little bit on the outside of your cheeks just to add a little bit more depth to those cheeks. I like having a little bit of brightness on the front of those cheeks. So I'm just building up that face slowly. And remember, it's acrylic paint. If you put in a layer and you don't like it, you can always switch it. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Just play with that paint and see what you get. Faces can often be intimidating to people to be able to paint or draw, but this primitive style really lends itself to just being really free and not having so many rules put on what faces are supposed to look like. And your eyes are going to read that it's a face. As long as you have some of your details in, like a nose, it's just a simple nose. All it is was a little line. It kind of looks like an upside down 7 is all I did. And my eyes are just an almond shape. I don't have a lot of details in there either. I do put a little bit of a slight eyebrow in with my pencil, and I leave it done in pencil. I decided I wanted to put a little collar on her, so I'm using some of that gesso again to create this collar look. I like using gesso as my white sometimes just because it is a very translucent color, so it just lends itself to being able to see some of those pretty colors underneath. It's not so opaque. Sometimes you want opaque, but in this instance, I wanted a slight translucent color so it would look kind of like lace. I took the end of my paintbrush and I applied the gesso on there to create the dots. When you tap this with your brush like this, your dots are going to get gradually smaller as you tap it. It's a great look and makes a really fun lace look. Time to work a little bit on that cute chicken. I wanted to bring some of that bright colored red that I used on my angel's hair down on my chicken. So I'm going to do the comb and the wattle on my chicken, that bright color red. I think it looks cute up against that dark blue. Now I'm going to work a little bit more on the eyes. I'm coming in with the end of my paintbrush actually and tapping in a little bit of bright white gesso to give the eye a little bit of brightness and white on each side. Now I got a little bit too much, so I just went in and I tapped it lightly with a baby wipe to soften my white, and that just toned it all the way back. Now I wanted to be able to add some blush to her cheeks, so I was using the Pyrrole Red and an inexpensive children's brush, paintbrush. It makes a perfect little scrubby brush to apply the paint. I'm adding the paint on my brush, but scrubbing most of it off and then coming in and giving her cheeks a little bit of scrubbing too. Makes a perfect blush for her cheek. At this point, I'm going to be ready to add some extra line work into my drawings. I'm going to be using that Kimberly pencil again, the 9XXB. I love the line work that it adds. It's also slightly water soluble too. I'm also going to be using a tool called an art graph. It's that dark piece that almost looks like a piece of charcoal that was in my hand. It makes a very dark line. It's water soluble, which means that when I put water on it, I can make it move around. You can see the dark, rich quality of that line. And I'm going to be wetting that and then bringing that up and adding some shadow around my angel. Now, once this dries, this is pretty permanent and it won't move around pretty much at all. But I'm going to just take that art graph and I'm going to be creating some line work and some darkness and some shadows by applying the water and then pushing that color around. By doing this, I'm getting even another bonus. I'm picking up the extra texture of that paper so you can see the little bit of ripness of where my papers are overlapping. So I'm picking up and enhancing my texture in my background. Looks great on this piece. I'm also going to be using the Art Graph tool to be able to create a nice rich border all the way around my item. So I'm going to take that Art Graph in my hand and I'm going to be using it kind of as a rubbing tool around my edge, and I'm creating just a really beautiful dark border. And once I have that border on, I add the water and man, the color really comes to life. It's a great tool. I just bought it at Dick Blick, I believe is where I purchased my Art Graph tool. This color works perfect on the edges where the edges are slightly torn and tattered. That really does sink in a little bit deeper and darker and creates a very rich rustic looking border. Perfect for today's project, right? Because it's all about rustic today. So I'm just taking a baby wipe now and I'm kind of giving it a little bit of a rub and then pushing it back down into my surface and just taking that wipe all the way around the edge. The project has a rather cool tone to it right now, and I knew I wanted to warm it up. And the perfect solution for me to use, and I often use this, is the instant coffee. I made a very much a concentrated form of instant coffee, and I've just let it dry out on my desk. It has never molded. It just sits there. When I want to use it again, I just reconstitute it with a little bit of water with a brush, take it in there, and voila, I have coffee stain ready to use. I love painting with this. I love doing watercolor style with this coffee mixture. And basically all it is just a concentrated instant coffee that has been dried out in this container, and it works perfectly for aging. So I'm going to be adding this on top. I'm just using just an inexpensive brush again, and I'll wipe it over everything, her skin tone, her dress, and I want to be able to tone my colors, and this is going to bring in that more rustic tone that I'm looking for. Now is when you can really tell how it's changing those acrylic colors underneath. When I apply that coffee tone on there, you can see how it's taking my Bahama blue more into a patina color. You can see how it's really changing the skirt color as well. And it actually kind of tones down and brings everything together so it doesn't look so separate. It looks like more of a piece that was all meant to be together. So I'm going to put that on there. I'll let it sit for just a little bit, and I have another step I like to do to actually bring out and find even more texture underneath from those papers. I have a razor blade. It's a flat razor blade that's attached inside of one of those plastic devices, and I'm just rubbing my razor blade over the top of it, and what that's doing is it's pushing the coffee down into the little individual pieces of my paper, and it's really going to pop out the texture. I'll show you a close-up of it just in a minute, but I'm just gliding it across. I'm not cutting anything with that blade or anything. It's holding it flat and scraping it across. It really does bring out my texture. I like using this technique, and I don't even mind sometimes when it does scratch back to my paint. I just call it extra texture. So as you see when I bring it up close, how it's pushing that coffee down into those paper areas, and I like that look. I do come in with a baby wipe and I do soften it here and there. You can always soften the look. You could take out what you would like, and you have a really interesting look for your paper. I had an idea of how I wanted to create her wings for my little angel. I wanted to create big, kind of like rather butterfly wings. So I put the big ones on with the Kimberly pencil, and then I drew two smaller ones in each of those wing sets. I wanted to create more of an open feel for her wings, and I thought this looked great. So I do it with the pencil, and remember how I said the Kimberly pencil is a little water soluble? So I'm touching that line with a little bit of water, and that's just softening the line. It also makes it slightly darker, but it's adding that wispy kind of soft line that I was looking for. I wanted the wings to be just a subtle element in the background, being still really pretty, but not being a strong painted element. I wanted that open feel of the pencil. Now I'm bringing in another element. This is just a China marker, a white China marker. Super simple, but it gives a wonderful little crayon kind of look to your drawing. It's still a white, but it's super soft. Here's a close-up look. You can kind of see how all the texture is coming together and the layers. Let me know in the comments if you're a mixed media fan, if you love all the yummy goodness and textures as much as I do. I thought I'd give this gal a messy bow. I'm not great at making bows. I can only make simple ones, the back and forth, but I had some of this ticking fabric that was already coffee stained, and I thought that would look great with her red hair. I had some cheesecloth that I also coffee stained. I thought that would give it some little extra rusticness by having that little bit of irregular fabric in there. I had some cheesecloth. I said cheesecloth, but I meant muslin. It was also coffee stained. Who else likes to dry their fabric inside of the oven? I like how it gives it that extra dark, rich quality when you dry it in the oven. So I just ripped it in half, and I'm just going back and forth creating a little simple bow. I think she turns out darling. A special thanks to Shelly and Dawn for hosting today's event, Everything Rustic. You're going to want to check in the description box for the links for their channels as well as the playlist for today. Hopefully you enjoyed that little bit of a mixed media roller coaster ride with me today. Let me know in the comments if you think I went too far or if you like all the things too and you love all of the wonderful textures. If you're new to my channel, pop on over and see what I create there. I'd love to have more creative friends join me and create some art fun.